And, just kind of something natural that I do. Maybe sometimes people don't want my advice, but I'm going to give it. I feel it's like the universe calling me to just speak whatever they need to hear. But, as someone who's in a longer term, ongoing relationship with a younger person, and whether you realize it or not, everything that you do, those young people kind of take in, and they try to mirror and reflect what they receive. So what kind of inspired you to write this book?
Sure. So I wrote the book in the midst of a world in chaos, so all through 2020. And as all of us know, 2020 was a time of great disruption. And it really illuminated a lot of different inequities, within our world. And one thing that I was always concerned about was how this was going to impact, very vulnerable communities such as ours. The LGBTQ community is particularly vulnerable and has shown to be particularly vulnerable during something like a great pandemic. At the same time, I am the gunkle to several biracial nieces specifically, one of whom is half Latino, half European. The other one is half Filipino, like myself, and half African American. And in the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement and the global awakening to inequities and injustices, it sort of fell onto me to help my cousin educate my nieces and nephews, specifically how to handle the intersections of their identity. And think through how to navigate really those complex conversations about race, about gender, about sexuality, about all these things that they embodied, that the world seemed to be attacking all at once, especially as young women, as young Black women, as young Asian women, especially in the rise of anti-Asian hate, for example. And so what I realized was, as a queer immigrant of color myself, who, as you said, has lived all over the world, who has navigated, corporate life and different kinds of situations as a very sort of genderqueer presenting immigrant of color, I and many, many people like me, like us, I feel have very unique perspectives, insights and wisdoms, if you will, that I think position us really uniquely to help not just young people, but I think a lot of different kinds of people understand what it means to go from trauma to their version of triumph. And all of that encompassed, sort of this want to really capture voices and capture perspectives of what it means to, engage a world that was in such upheaval, and making sure that we captured those insights that we hope we could share with others. Other thing also that I realized, as I have worked in helping to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in particularly corporate spaces, especially conservative corporate spaces, my entire life. And what I discovered was the creation of space, the creation of community, is something that I think LGBTQ people are uniquely qualified to comment on, because we have literally spent our entire existence, right, navigating and creating safe spaces for us to become our true, authentic selves. And if nothing else, I feel like this book is finally a celebration that LGBTQ queer narratives are absolutely not only worth telling, but glean wisdoms that merits really being shared across the world, that we actually have stories and insights, maybe a few cautionary tales that can help advise not only the younger generation, but I think, society in general.
Yeah, I really like your explanation. And yeah, as you were even talking prior to you stating it, it's like, yeah, this is even for people of all ages to be able to either understand themselves and or understand other family members at whatever age they might be. And you're absolutely right. Most LGBTQ people have really had to fight to and struggle to abandon, possibly negative situations, family abandonment, and so forth, and come to love themselves and love their identity for who and everything that they are. And so you're right. We have a very unique perspective because we don't have that heteronormative norm of, being a cisgender heterosexual male, cisgender heterosexual female. And so we go through so much more, and but they too have issues and can learn from us as well. So I really applaud you for seeing that gap in the kind of almost educational, I know it might not be, wasn't your necessarily intent, but I almost see it almost like a narrative, but an educational, informational almost like a self-help in a way, whether that was your intent or not. And you know, I do admit it's not published yet, so I've not read it yet, but would love to. Hopefully, you'll send me a copy to do so.
Of course, absolutely.
And so, one, I'd like to ask you in the audience, you know, right now, if you could go into the comments on whatever application or website that you are watching or listening to this to, do you have a do you have a gunkle or trunkle or any of those others? Do you have someone that has been non-conforming, whether queer or not, even if they're heterosexual yet non-conforming, you know, that you have, you know, had as a someone to look up to in your life and, you know, be a bit of a mentor, you know, even if they're like a deadhead motorcycle rider, you know, cisgender heterosexual male, if they were kind of the black sheep in the family, did you learn something from them? Did they inspire you in some way to be your authentic self? Again, regardless of your gender identity or sexual orientation. We'd love to hear from your comments down below and hopefully engage with other folks on the platforms. Okay, so with that, let's talk a little bit about. So that was kind of your inspiration, and so kind of walk us maybe through some of the content in your book, and maybe a few of the stories that you share in brief.
So you literally just brought one up. Thank you so much for the convenient segue. So
awesome.
I would say one of the anchoring concepts in my book is this idea of the black sheep. So actually what starts off the book is this story of a cousin of mine, a very, very young cousin of mine who had, in many ways, I think, started to live out what many immigrant parents and immigrant families would have deemed as a successful life. She got married young, she got a good job, she bought a house very young, she was about to raise a family. And in the course of all of this, she started to realize that a lot of the dreams that she thought she was trying to activate, that she had been taught were the dreams that she needed to aspire towards, weren't necessarily what she wanted out of her life. And whether by design or by simply the fact that, you know, life was just happening a little differently than she expected, things that one would see or consider to be the hallmarks of a successful immigrant existence were starting to fall apart. So her marriage started to fall apart. This was also during the housing crisis. So she was starting to foreclose on her home. She lost her job. And in many ways, she went from being the golden child of our family to becoming more of a disappointment. And so she basically packed up her entire life. She left her husband, she filed for divorce, she left her husband, and then ran basically across the country, found a job opportunity in, of all places, Washington, D.C., called me from the road as she was traveling by herself in a tiny little car up through Memphis, having never driven across the country before, calls me up and says, "Hey, I'm actually on my way to D.C. I'm going there for a job interview. Can I spend a couple of nights with you just so I can get myself settled?" And I said, okay, sure. I haven't talked to you in forever, but sure, absolutely, come over. It was a blizzard, I remember that evening. So the fact that she had to drive through snowstorms for the first time in her life also made me really, really nervous, because as a good older cousin / gunkle, I'm very, very nervous about my cousin's safeties. And so she came into my door, and after cocktails, wine, dinner, more cocktails and wine, she telling her story. I finally asked her, so why me? Why DC? Why would you want to stay with me? Because at that point, I had lived away from the rest of my family in Washington, D.C. for several years. And it's not that I necessarily was estranged, but I will just say that I very purposefully decided to move to the other side of the country, to the other side of the world from where the rest of my family was, because I felt I needed space to discover who I was as an LGBTQ person. And she found me, she reconnected with me, and I asked her, why me? And she said, it's because us black sheep have to stick together. And frankly, it was that term, that sentiment, that sentence that literally launched everything in my book, because it was at that moment that I had to decide for myself whether or not being called a black sheep was a brand of shame or a badge of honor. And then I immediately started looking at her. I looked at the excitement, the escape, the want to start a new life. And I realized that as a black sheep, I was also a beacon to her, as somebody who also felt that she was either a disappointment to the family, that she was going down a path that people either did not approve of or did not plan for, and that she was basically living a very, very different kind of life and hoping for a different future than what she was taught. And I realized that there was a kinship there, and that there was some almost a responsibility for to take whatever I had learned by that point as an LGBTQ person, professional, human being, really, to see if I could create this space around her, around us, so that not only her, but future Black sheep in our family would have a safe harbor, either with me or with other people in our family that would create this community, within our community. But also acknowledge the fact that as Black sheep, that is what we do. We are safe harbors for each other because we live to disrupt, to innovate, to break norms, to define new rules, right? And what I say is Black sheep are critical because we defy every single instance of it's always been that way. Right? We recognize that, having to live by this idea of it's always been that way has never moved our society forward, has never given us innovation. And if anything, it's only ever forced us to stay stuck in very discriminatory, non-inclusive ways of living and being. Whereas Black sheep, we call out the BS, we call out the veneer, and we acknowledge that things have to be different. And in so doing, we create frankly, more inclusive spaces and worlds around us where we can be our true selves.
I love that story. And, and even if she's, cisgender, heterosexual, female, recognizing the Black sheep and realizing that, all LGBTQ people go through that, right? And you can be heterosexual and still kind of go through that, just for whatever reasons. And breaking away from the expectations of family, because, if you grew up and your family were a bunch of lawyers and, the family then expects that you're going to grow up and be a lawyer, but you really want to be a musician, or you want to be an actor, or you want to be in marketing like yourself, then they become disappointed. You're not fulfilling the family obligations. And, you have to love your family, but you also have to set boundaries and love yourself first and foremost, and make your authentic self. Again, no matter what your sexual orientation or gender identity is, you have to take care of you, and you have to do what makes you happy. And then in your professional life, if you do follow your passions, even if it's not successful to what other family members might measure as success, so long as you're doing what you love and you are, you have a roof over your head, you have food on the table, you're paying your bills, etc. Who cares if you have $50,000 in the bank or 5 million? So long as you're happy, but based on your definition of what makes you happy and your success, that I find that to be, when you're honoring yourself. And so I love that your niece came to you and sought you out. You obviously have created, a good impact with them. Are there any other stories in the?
Oh, absolutely. So what I did was to make so first of all, the idea of the Black sheep, I think, is what I hope makes my content far more universal, even though these are all very unapologetically queer stories, and I'll get to in a minute, is that each of them hold very, very, first of all, they're very human. So while they are unapologetically queer, they are very, very human, but they also hold all these wisdoms and these ideas about self and personhood that I think are very, very universal. And Black Sheep is just that. It's meant to really make these unapologetically queer stories much more universal. The way that I also try to make these universal is by really creating a diverse pantheon, if you will, of stories. So originally, when I pitched my book to the publisher, I was going to create basically a coffee table style book, typical of what you would see at an Urban Outfitters, that you would give to like a college bound niece or nephew or child, so that they would have something fun and chic to to have on their coffee table or their bookshelf. And it was going to have like cute little illustrations of suave gay men holding up martini glasses saying, "You got this, girl," and yes. But then I also wanted to create something that reflected voices more than just my own. So I started to gather this amazing cast of people, real people, right, from different walks of life, academics, drag queens, journalists, people like myself who are in marketing, my own stories in there, as well as, a whole host of different kinds of experiences and life experiences to make sure that our voices were diverse and spoke to different kinds of people and different kinds of experiences and life narratives. And what I realized was before I could get to their advice and convey their triumph, I had to go through their trauma. Like I had to think about, what was it that really made them credible gurus to begin with, and what makes us credible gurus is all the BS that we go through. It's all the things that we have to get through to become who we are today and to continue to evolve, right? It's all the things that we've had to question, of all the things that we've had to disrupt or to redefine, either in society or for ourselves. It's all the different families that we've had to choose and we've had to design. It's even the deconstruction of what it means to be family, because many of us were either rejected or estranged from our families. So even that creation and that design of community around us, becomes a central component to the book, and also something that I feel like becomes a very, very clear kind of wisdom that we can teach others about what it means to design affirming communities around us. And so what I did was I picked these very, very diverse characters from my life that reflect, people of color. At least 2/3 of my book have characters that are people of color. Many are immigrants, and of those immigrants, all of us have escaped major traumatic socioeconomic upheavals. I myself grew up under martial law during the Marcos dictatorship in the Philippines. And so that very much informs, my career path and my life path in general as well, about how I continue to strive to protect rights while fighting for new ones, because I didn't grow up with a lot of them. And then there was also making sure that many of my cast members are also transgender or gender non-binary, or really express gender in a really fluid way. And everyone comes from different socioeconomic backgrounds. They're from literally all over the world. And this, I hope, is what allows me to create a very, very, I think a different kind of LGBTQ narrative that, really elevates voices that haven't really been used to represent, LGBTQ identity, which frankly, for the most part of my queer becoming has been cisgendered, white and male. And so I'm hoping that by elevating, BIPOC voices and gender creative and expansive voices in this context, it allows me to really sort of create that universality while also honoring these unique perspectives. I have a beautiful story about what I call the gender alchemist. He's a Paraguayan non-binary drag artist and hairstylist who regards his art as drag as a form of gender alchemy, where they take elements of masculine and feminine and create something completely different, all in a way to deal with the traumas of having to go through conversion therapy and the sociopolitical upheavals in Paraguay that they escaped. I also have a beautiful story about the nerd, and that is a cosplayer based out of Atlanta and New York City who uses science fiction and cosplay and costuming and Comic-Cons as a way to discover themselves, but also discover chosen family, right? And what it means to create community around you. And then, of course, there's the story of my, my really, really good friend who is a academic, a Black African-American academic from Ohio who, is wheelchair bound, but has managed to fly and travel more states, more cities, more countries, more continents than anyone I know. And they have, basically discovered this love, not only for travel, but this way of discovering who they are, through travel by discovering different places and engaging in other cultures. They become closer to their own culture and they become more confident, let's just put it that way, in asserting their own culture, especially through the lens of disability, where they've now also become a major advocate against ableism and for disability and accessibility in travel, particularly. And all this to say is that, all these different characters all come together, all with this vision, basically, to create a better world, a better life, a better future for their nieces, nephews, goddaughters, godchildren, their nibblings. Oh, that's another term that I also created or introducing, nibblings. It's the gender neutral term for nieces and nephews. And so they try to create basically a different future, a better future for their nibblings by imparting on them all of these lessons that they have, gleaned and they've honed throughout their lives.
Wow, sounds like an amazing book. And you call them characters, but just for clarity, again, folks in the audience, you've heard these are true stories. Okay,
yes, these are true stories. Yes,
yeah, they are true stories. And you know what I'd love for you listening and watching is if you would be so bold without necessarily divulging, too much personal information that you're not comfortable with, is maybe put down in the comments, how you're a black sheep, some of maybe the obstacles that you've overcame, and what have been the positive results of it. We can take on the victim mentality that, oh, this happened to me, and therefore everything in my life is a result of this negative thing. But it's when we reframe it and we say, this is what I have overcame, and it's actually part of me and what has made me stronger today. And therefore, I can champion the world. So give us a little bit of information, if you will, about those, kind of past perceived negative things that happened in your life and how you have transformed that into your superpower. We'd love to hear it and give you thumbs up for making that transition in your life. So when is your book due to be published? It said summer, of this year. Is it out now?
Or? Actually, so I got a surprise actually yesterday. According to my publisher, they confirmed that it's been submitted to all the different places where books are sold and distributed. And so I'm just waiting, frankly, for things like my Amazon link. So it may be published as soon as the end of this week, certainly by the time this podcast airs. So, it'll be out there, I think, in the world very, very, very soon. And it's been quite a journey. It's kind of literally like having a baby. So,
I totally understand. And when you do get any of those links, if at any point, shoot me over those. And absolutely. If the episode is already out, I'll update the show notes and so forth. So be sure to check out the show notes down below, whether you're viewing this on OutBüro.com, YouTube, or one of the 15 podcasting apps, so that you can get this book because it sounds amazing.
Oh, and just to be quick, all information will be on my website, www.thewisdomofguncles.com. I'm also using the hashtag #thewisdomofguncles and hashtag Guncles. In fact, get prepared for me to basically blow up that hashtag Guncles with adorable little stories and photos of queer people and our proteges, and with little bits of advice that they would want to impart on them. So that's how you'll be able to find it.
Awesome. Well, you are in marketing, so
I am in marketing. Yes,
you have a huge advantage over a lot of other authors, who have the concept for a book but don't know how to market. So good for you. I could definitely see Instagram posts and so forth with a cute image and a, short inspirational sentence and, hashtag Guncle.
Exactly.
Very cool. Very cool. So I know, this is your first book and you have had, as we just mentioned, a career in marketing. Would you mind maybe giving us a little bit of your background?
Sure, absolutely. So I would say where my career intersects, and I see it as a triangle. So it's been firmly entrenched for the last 20 years in sort of this intersection of brand and creative communications and marketing strategy, innovation and product development. That's where I've usually done it. And then in the last 10, 15 years, I've been doing all of that also while doing a lot of work in diversity, equity, inclusion. I think a lot of people call it the gay job versus the day job, except in the last couple of years, in my prior role as the global director of brand for Fortune 500, I had the honor of actually combining my gay job as the head of an LGBTQ affinity group, business resource group in my firm, with my day job of being the director of brand, leading a rebrand of this Fortune 500 that I was part of, that I am still part of. And through all that, I've also served as a senior advisor in brand, in diversity strategy and product innovation for a whole host of primarily federal clients in the defense and intelligence industries, which means that I've been operating in this space, providing my expertise in creative storytelling to spaces that have not always necessarily been friendly of accepting of a genderqueer femme immigrant of color such as myself. So for me, what I've always dedicated my work to is not just marketing and brand strategy and helping some of our country's leaders really help to, create technologies that keep us safe or to create policies that help us thrive, Those are my talking points anyway for them. It's really about creating space. I have a line in my book: always leave a space more welcoming than how you found it. And that's how I feel that I have dedicated my career to, whether that is in the field of marketing and brand strategy for major areas in our defense, intel, and product innovation, industries, or whether it's in my community itself, creating spaces where we can thrive, where we can be our authentic selves in a way that is safe and in a way that builds on inclusion, right? So that while I have always found myself to be in spaces where I can build inclusivity, I want to make sure that it continues to be protected, but also we broaden that definition. So future generations and other people who may not identify like I do, but need a safe space to be who they are, can find that space in wherever it is that I and my colleagues and my community exists. And so that's been my career. It's been mostly in that space of, diversity, product innovation, and brand. And what I'm really hoping is that this allows me to, help build these spaces where we can create equity, where we can create, visibility, especially, and really understand what it means to, tell stories and activate the power of stories. I would say that probably at the center of that intersection is creative storytelling. And it's this idea that, what activates a brand, what creates adoption of new products and innovation, and absolutely what protects and advances diversity, equity, and inclusion is storytelling. And I find that all of that is what I am trying to pour into this new first book that I'm creating.
Yes, I was going to say some things, but you kind of did it right there. And that is, through storytelling, people can learn and assimilate, right? And adapt and have empathy for the other, because this story, just captures them. And, for anyone who's ever cried at a movie, that's exactly what it is. You're feeling empathy for the story. And the stories that you told us that are forthcoming in this book here are relatable. What sounds like very relatable stories that you could you can put yourself in that person's position, and through the story feel what they might have felt. Mm-hmm. So really, really enjoy that. And well, wonderful. Well, I definitely look forward to seeing this book. It sounds absolutely amazing. One of the things with authors that I like to talk about, because there is different kind of approaches. And so in writing this book, kind of talking to aspiring authors out there, what was kind of your process in creating this piece of work?
So I haven't wanted to write a book pretty much since I was a kid. In fact, actually about halfway through writing this book, I visited my mother, and in helping her declutter and dehoard her home, we had encountered this entire box of just stuff that she had saved. And in that were all these essays and these stories that I had written when I was a teenager, a very, very angsty teenager, mind you. But in that were elements that I find myself replicating now. It's this want, to build a better future. It's this want to escape. It's this want to recognize that all the traumas and the struggles that we go through to discover who we are, to hide who we are, and then to uncover who we are, right? And to evolve with it, like all of that was swirling in my very adolescent brain. A lot of that has evolved in many ways. It demonstrated to me that the voice that I had used in this book was something that I had seeded many, many, many years ago, when I was a teenager. And so for me, the process started then in that sort of, space of adolescent self-discovery. And I have used my 20 years in industry to hone a voice and basically also just gain confidence that I have a story worth telling, and that my community has stories that are absolutely worth telling and celebrating. And so I pitched it. I actually was I myself was being interviewed by a fellow author. And in the process of being interviewed, I asked them, so how did you get this book deal? How did you get this book published? They walked me through their process. They recommended me to their publisher. I pitched actually a multiple series book. So The Wisdom of Guncles is one of several books that I'm going to be writing around queer relationships and queer people in relationships, and in the relationships with family, relationships with themselves. But it's the idea really around queer people and family, very, very specifically chosen family. But basically, it's a series of books around queer people and family. But I pitched that. They liked it. They realized that these were unique stories. It's certainly very unique in their portfolio of stories, and so they pushed me through. And then I began what I call the process of figuring out how to solve a jigsaw puzzle with pieces made out of water, where you have the outline, the concept right around it, but the stuff inside it continues to shift and change. And it did certainly shift and change for me with every single interview that I did, with every single new sort of research that I did, and every single new interviewee that weaved their own stories into this overall tapestry. It started to shift and change. And so what I had to learn was things that I have not always necessarily been good at, and that's flexibility and ability to change my vision. But it worked out really well. I will say this, to the credit of my publisher, New Degree Press, and I will say their words again, New Degree Press, an amazing publisher, they actually paired me with queer editors, which I did not expect at all in this process. And a lot of queer writers that I have talked to, that's one of our biggest concerns, like I would say one of our biggest fears, is whether or not a publisher and their editing staff would understand our journey and would understand, the nuances, right, of LGBTQ experience, language, culture. And the fact that I was working with editors who identified as queer, who identified as non-binary, who themselves have very similar journeys as my own, made me feel that my stories and the stories that I were reflecting from other people into this book were being protected and honored in really special ways. And that was fantastic. So I walked through basically 3-4 months. Truth be told, I wrote a majority of this book in about 2 weeks, highly, highly concentrated in the middle of pandemic Christmas, where I didn't go anywhere. My husband and I basically stayed home. And so there's a groove on the end of my couch that's basically has my ass, my coffee, and my laptop burned into it. And so I wrote it really, really furiously. I did my interviews in and out of that. I actually ended up interviewing 25 people, and I chose 10 stories for this book. And then I wrote it, I got it edited, I edited it again and again and again. I actually ended up writing with 5 editors. And then I submitted my manuscript in June, and now it's gone through the process of production. And then yay, I got my ISBN, I got my Amazon link, or soon to be getting my Amazon list link. And all of this basically means that, it took me that long basically just to get it, conceived of, written, which from what I've heard is a pretty fast journey. But once again, these are stories and ideas that have been bubbling inside me since I was a teenager. So for well more than 20 years, it's been a while since I've been a teenager. Wow. So it was easy. It kind of poured out of me just because it's things that I've been wanting to say for a long time.
Okay. Well, and, very interesting because, so many writers don't start off pitching directly to a publisher right away and getting a green light and then starting writing, right? So many start off writing their book, going either self-publishing or finding a publisher.
Let me also be very clear. I just realized I buried the lead. Okay. So, but actually my true intention for these stories and my true intention even pitching the book was because I actually want these to become Netflix shows. I want these to become streaming. And so I had actually already written a treatment for a show around LGBTQ families and LGBTQ people in general, sort of like a combination of Queer Eye and Marie Kondo, where we would, help people basically declutter their lives and then queer eye them into the best version of themselves. That was sort of my pitch. And then what I had been told by, Netflix coaches and storytellers and content creators is that I needed a book. I needed something real to present back to Netflix to say that this is intellectual property that I own, that is mine, that is something that I can produce and lead, right, as a creative. And so yes, I also pitched it with this overall arc. Like I said, I'm a career marketer. So I kind of see how content manifests, and I want to be able to see content manifest in different ways because I understand that as human beings, we receive stories in different ways. And I think any of us who, survived the pandemic knows that we owe a lot of our survival and mental space to things like Netflix and streaming, because that kind of storytelling, I think, saved a lot of us a Tiger King. So all that is to say is that, that was my original intention. It continues to be my intention. So now that I have a published book, my goal, and hopefully from your podcast to a producer's ear, my goal is to actually translate a lot of these stories into either a streaming show, a mini documentary, what have you. So that was the full, narrative, let's say.
I love it. You're a size queen like me. You think big.
I do. I like big. I
do. think big, do big, or don't bother, honey. Spoken as true queers. Oh my God. Well, wow. You know what? I do love that you're thinking big with this. If you just want to write a book so that your family, so that you can have it on the shelf and see that it was produced, good for you, darling. Good for you. But thinking larger and seeing where things can go, and having that in mind from the get-go, I think is extremely smart. And is there any last words before we sign off today?
Not at all. I just want to say thank you so much for having me today. I think it's so important that you provide this kind of platform for LGBTQ people and those of us who have, interesting things to say and hopefully interesting wisdoms to impart, either through a book, a Netflix series, or any other medium. Also, I would just also like to offer to your readers that if they ever want to connect with me, I'm more than happy to. And if they would like to learn more about the book, obviously there's a website. I would also even be willing to send out a couple free copies, when it comes out, for people who are interested to, if they want to talk about it more, and also even maybe host me on some of their podcasts as well. That'd be great. Or, whatever it means. Like I said, I'm a marketer, so I'm all about basically, spreading the stories.
Absolutely. And we'll have those links down below. So be sure to check that out and connect up with Michael and order that book, even pre-order it as soon as it becomes available. Well, thank you, everyone, for staying tuned to this episode of OutBüro Voices. I hope you've been inspired today, maybe learned something, and provided a few comments down below for feedback and encouragement. Be sure to check out outbüro.com at outburo.com. Just complete at least 30% of your professional profile so that you can connect with others, join groups, and so forth, including, for an example, Writers Group. That's actually moderated by an author, educator, and editor. She's American, but based in the UK with her lovely lesbian wife. And I'm sure that she would love to see you all there and give you encouragement, guidance, and support each other. Again, that is outbüro.com. Complete at least 30% of your profile and then join the Writers Group. Well, thank you, everyone, for again staying tuned, and be sure to hit that subscribe and notification bell to be notified of all future episodes, and we'll see you on outbüro.com real soon. Bye-bye.